Okay, so rewind to Christmas last year. My girlfriend sent me this picture of a little jewelry holder that she wanted me to make. So like every other woodworker out there, I was like, yeah, sure, I can make that for Christmas, along with 20 other things that I was trying to make people for Christmas. Long story short, she didn't get that as a Christmas present. But here we are 5 months later, and it's her birthday in a few days, and I've procrastinated yet again. But I really want to get this made for her, so we're going to do that today. Now I'm going to be making it out of some cherry and just some 1/2-inch dowel that I bought from the big box store. In theory, it should be a pretty simple build, but anyone who's ever done woodworking knows that the simple stuff usually ends up being the hardest. So we'll see. Let's get into it. All right, so we're going to be starting with the piece of cherry here that I'm cutting down to a rough length that I can fit both of my pieces out of, and then we'll rip it down on the table saw. Now, if you notice in some of my videos, my table saw blade is pretty high. That's because the adjustment on it is broken, and if I don't have it set super high, this is what happens. It eventually creeps down underneath the height of the wood, and then I have to do this shady adjustment thing and try and lock it in again. Basically, I can only lock it in as high as it'll go or at a very low setting. So I've said it before, but if any fancy table saw companies want to sponsor me and send me a saw, that'd be pretty sweet. Anyways. So the angles I'm going to be cutting on my pieces to form the triangle is a 60-degree angle. And here I'm just using my little digital angle finder to help me get that angle just right. 59.9 is close enough, if you ask me. So I went ahead and made the first cut, and then like an idiot, I don't know why, I bumped the knob that is used to set the angle on the saw, and it promptly fell. So I had to do the whole digital angle finder thing again and get the saw set back at 60 degrees. So I went ahead and cut both my pieces. The bottom piece is around 18 inches, and then the vertical side piece is at 19 and a half because it overlaps the bottom piece, so it's a little bit longer. Now, in order to be able to drill the holes that the dowels are going to pass through on the vertical piece, I needed to make this little jig. So I took some scrap wood, drilled a hole in it the size of the dowel hole, and then brought it over to the miter saw and cut a 30-degree angle on it. Basically, this just gives me a little jig that I can clamp to my piece and drill the holes at the angle that I want them. So I made 3 marks on the piece where I wanted to drill my holes. They're spaced out about 5 inches apart. And then I clamped my little jig piece to the board and drilled my holes. Full disclosure, it worked okay. I wouldn't say it was perfect, but it got the job done. Now we're going to be moving on to the planer next, and I love this planer, but one thing I do not love is changing the blades in this thing. If you happen to own a planer like this, then you understand the struggle of undoing all 47,000 screws that this thing has, just so that you can swap the blades out. But even worse than doing all that work to put new blades in is doing all that work and then finding out the blades that you bought from the shady Amazon dealer don't actually fit because they're like 1/2 inch too long. So I did my best to sharpen up the old crummy blades so that I could plane these 2 pieces down. after putting all 47,000 screws back in. Now I like to run my pieces through on both sides and both faces. That way it helps clean up any saw marks or tear out that might be left from the table saw or the miter saw. Makes it look all nice and purty on all the sides. Next, I'm using this 1/2-inch groove bit here to route out a little tray area on the bottom piece. That's just for like rings and things to sit in so they don't slide off the shelf. Now the jig I made here is literally just 4 pieces of scrap wood just screwed to each other, and I did my best to make sure that it was square to the piece that I was routing. I also probably should have bought a new router bit because the one I had was a little dull and it left a few little burn marks, especially in the corners. So if you're doing something like this yourself where you're routing out a little inset area, I would definitely recommend making sure you have a nice sharp router bit. That way you're gonna save yourself the headache of trying to sand inside this little area. Speaking of sanding, I went ahead and gave these just a rough sanding to get them ready for the glue up. I also went ahead and cut my dowels just to rough length. I left them a little bit oversized so that once I get them put in, I can cut them to the exact length that I want later. Now, this little tiny glue up was the bane of my existence. I have no idea what the best way to clamp 2 sides of a triangle together are, and I did not do a good job. I tried a million different methods, used some offcuts, tried to use a million clamps and some scrap pieces. Nothing seemed to be working. So eventually I just clamped the piece to the workbench and kind of left it and kept my fingers crossed that it would hold. Luckily, after it dried, it seemed to be holding up okay. And obviously this thing isn't going to be holding a ton of weight, so I'm not too concerned with how strong this joint is. If you do end up with any small gaps in your glue joints like this, you can just throw some glue over top of it and then some sawdust on top of that, and then just come through with your sander and sand it away, and it'll work as a nice little filler. All right, now we can finally get these dowels put into place. So I'm just tapping them in roughly to where I want them, and then I can come back with a straight edge and reference the other 2 ends of the triangle to try and make sure that those meet flush with where that 3rd triangle piece would be if it were there. Then I just used a little scrap piece to make some marks on where I want to cut off the ends of these dowels. Then I just came through with my little oscillating saw and made those cuts on my marks. Then I sanded the whole thing up to 220 to get it ready for finish. I'm not using anything too fancy, just a Danish oil finish on this. Now there were a couple of the dowel pieces that were just a tiny bit wonky, so I went ahead and clamped them overnight while the finish dried in hopes that they would straighten out a little bit, and it did work for one of them. One of them is still a little wonky, to be completely honest. Okay, so I wasn't really sure how I wanted to hang this on the wall. I tossed around a handful of ideas, thought about just drilling some holes, but I really want it to mount flush with the wall and not have any visible hangers or holes or anything. So I I think I'm gonna go my usual route with a keyhole bit and the router. The only problem is I can't really build a jig around this to try and drill perfect little keyholes. So I'm gonna try and freehand these keyholes and hope that it doesn't ruin the whole project. I don't know, we'll see. Fingers crossed.
In an effort to be completely transparent again, this first hole didn't turn out super great. The other two turned out really good. So 2 out of 3, not bad. That's what, 66%? I think that's still passing, right? Now I'm going to be adding some hooks on the bottom here so that she can hang necklaces, etc., whatever. So I'm just making my mark so I can drill my holes and then put my hooks in. The only hooks I had on hand were these little white ones. I don't really know if she's going to like them. She might hate them. But luckily, these are easily swapped out for different kinds. Also, screwing in these things will do a number on your fingers. I know there's a million other fast ways that you can do this, but I was too lazy, and so I just grabbed a pencil and used that. Then I hung it up just to make sure that it would actually hang. And I also went to my mom and asked if I could steal some jewelry so that I could stage this thing for a YouTube video. So there you have it, a little jewelry organizer. If you enjoyed the video, definitely leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the things. Thanks for watching.